In the dense island chains of the Solomon Islands, there is a little-known statistic buried deep in U.S. Navy after-action reports. Between January and August of 1942, at least 6 American PT boats vanished without a single confirmed enemy engagement. These boats, fast, low, and lethal, were meant to slip through darkness and strike at the edges of the Japanese advance. Yet for several crews the night simply closed around them and no trace ever resurfaced. Their sudden silences became one of the earliest and most unsettling mysteries of the Pacific War. The struggle for the Solomons was defined by chaos. Navigation charts were incomplete, air superiority shifted by the day, and the sea itself often felt like an adversary. For the men of Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 and later Squadron 2, many barely in their 20s, night patrols meant threading narrow passages between reefs, mangrove coves, and volcanic headlands. They relied on primitive radios, a compass, and intuition. Even the slightest error could turn the darkness into a death trap. But throughout 1942, commanders noticed abrupt breaks in routine patrol check-ins. Boats that had radioed in one moment simply ceased to exist the next. One such case occurred on the night of March 8, 1942. PT-67 departed Tulagi Harbor shortly after sunset, assigned to sweep the coast west of Savo Island where Japanese barges were known to run supplies. Lieutenant Frank Harriman, its commanding officer, kept a neat logbook. Its final entry noted, "Sea calm, visibility good, engine steady." After that, nothing. No distress call. No smoke sighted by other patrols. Dawn revealed only empty water and a drift of coconut fronds washing onto the shoreline. 4 years, the last line of Harriman's log would be all the Navy had to work with. To understand how a vessel could disappear so completely, historians often turn to the words of those who survived the nightly gauntlet. One diary entry from a PT boat radioman, written weeks after Harriman's loss, reads, "The ocean out here swallows sound. Sometimes you feel you're the only soul awake on Earth. Then you hear an engine's ghost and you hope it's friendly." These men operated in a battle space where hearing an enemy engine rarely meant seeing the enemy. Japanese destroyers, nicknamed the Tokyo Express, were notorious for running without lights, their dark-painted hulls nearly invisible until their guns flashed. A single broadside could obliterate a wooden PT boat in seconds. Still, post-war analysis uncovered no Japanese record of an engagement near Savo Island that night. This absence of evidence only deepened speculation. Some naval engineers suspected catastrophic structural failures. Early PT boats were built of layered mahogany planking, strong for their weight, but vulnerable to hidden weaknesses from repeated high-speed impacts against rough seas. A sudden hull breach in pitch-black water could flood the engines and sink the craft before a radio operator had time to reach his set. Others argued the most likely culprit was a mine. The Japanese had seeded several passages between Florida Island and Guadalcanal during the first months of the campaign, and many charts wouldn't be updated until much later. Yet there was another detail, often overlooked in wartime summaries. Enemy air reconnaissance frequently tailed American patrol routes. Japanese float planes, Aichi E-13A Jakes, were reported circling above harbors just after dusk, mapping boat movements. If PT-67 was ambushed, it wasn't impossible that the attackers struck with precision knowledge of where it would be. But again, surviving Japanese squadron logs mention no such interception. Modern naval historians occasionally revisit these cases when teaching lessons in maritime risk. The disappearance of PT-67 and others reminds analysts of the vulnerability of small craft operating at the edge of communications reliability. A single equipment malfunction, combined with the fog of war, can erase entire events from the historical record. In the Solomons, the environment itself conspired with human error and enemy activity to create a perfect storm of uncertainty. Today, sonar teams mapping old battlefields still come across anomalies, hints of hulls buried beneath coral and volcanic ash. But identifying them after 8 decades is often impossible. What remains most haunting is how routine the final mission seemed. Harriman's patrol was not an offensive strike, nor a pursuit, nor a rescue. It was ordinary, another entry in a long list of nightly sweeps meant to give intelligence officers a sense of Japanese barge activity. That such a standard operation could end in total disappearance unsettled commanders at the time, and still captivates researchers now. There were no survivors to offer testimony, no debris fields to analyze, no clear sequence of events to reconstruct. By the end of 1942, whispers circulated among crews that something beyond enemy fire was claiming patrol boats. Reefs not on maps, unseen mines drifting on currents, perhaps even friendly vessels mistaking silhouettes in the dark. These explanations were all plausible but none fully satisfying. The war would continue forward, but the mystery of PT-67 lingered, forming the first thread in a larger pattern of unexplained losses. And in the months ahead, that pattern would only deepen, stretching beyond the Pacific and into the English Channel, where more Allied patrol boats would vanish without a signal, a splash, or a single trace of their final moments. In the summer of 1943, as the English Channel simmered under the tension of nightly duels between Allied patrols and German E-boats, British commanders noted a statistic that rarely reached public view. More than a dozen motor launches and motor gunboats had disappeared without confirmed combat. Among them was ML 1303, a small, fast patrol craft assigned to counter enemy infiltration along the Normandy-bound shipping routes. On June 19, it departed Portsmouth under a blanket of fog so dense it swallowed the horizon. It was expected back before dawn. It never returned. The struggle facing the Channel patrol crews was unlike any other front in the war. The waters between Britain and France were among the most heavily mined, radar-scanned, and aggressively contested sea lanes on Earth. Every night, British coastal forces sortied from small ports, Dover, Felixstowe, Portland, to intercept German S-boats, guide convoys, and protect amphibious training exercises. The men of ML 1303 were veterans of this constant maritime duel. Their boat, a Fairmile B-class craft, was equipped with twin Lewis guns, depth charges, and a modest but reliable wireless set. They were trained to fight, but also to listen, to engines in the dark, to shifts in tide, to the hum of distant propellers that signaled danger. Yet on that night, the Channel had gone strangely quiet. The fog that rolled in after sunset reduced visibility to barely a ship's length. The crew's last recorded transmission at 23:42 was routine, holding course 180. No contacts. After that, silence. No alarm, no urgent code word, no hint that anything was amiss. Insight into the dangers ML 1303 faced comes from the journal of Lieutenant David Granger, a coastal forces officer who wrote of the Channel's hidden threats. The fog is a living thing, thick enough to hide a destroyer at 50 yards. We hear the Germans' diesels long before we see them, but sometimes we hear nothing at all. It is the stealth that unnerves you. The stealth Granger described was characteristic of the Kriegsmarine Schnellboot, or E-boats, sleek, fast craft capable of delivering torpedo attacks with terrifying precision. These German boats frequently patrolled the waters off Cherbourg and Boulogne, darting across the Channel at night to strike Allied convoys. But German records from the night of June 19 report no confirmed contact with a British motor launch near the area ML 1303 was assigned. Intercepts decrypted by British codebreakers in 1943 likewise noted no engagement. This absence of enemy acknowledgement left investigators searching for alternative explanations. One theory emerged from naval engineers who studied the region's minefields. Throughout 1942 and 1943, German aircraft dropped parachute mines designed to drift with the current before settling unpredictably. Many of these mines were never charted precisely, and the fog could have pushed ML 1303 off its intended route. A single mine detonation beneath the hull would have shattered the wooden craft instantly, leaving little to no surface debris, especially in strong tides. Another possibility came from declassified Admiralty memos referencing S-boats operating without running lights and with strict radio silence. If an interception occurred and the engagement was swift, the British boat might never have had the chance to signal. But the lack of German claims still complicates this scenario. What makes the disappearance more intriguing is the testimony of a nearby convoy escort, HMS Cottesmore, whose crew reported hearing a dull, distant thump shortly after midnight, an indistinct noise swallowed by fog. The officer on watch logged it as possible mine detonation, bearing uncertain. No investigation was launched at the time. In the confusion of nightly patrols, such sounds were tragically common. Modern historians reviewing these wartime events often highlight how scant information can distort our understanding of a single night at sea. At the height of the Channel Shadow War, communication failures, overlapping patrol routes, and strict secrecy created gaps in the record that persist decades later. ML 1303's loss demonstrates the inherent risk of small craft operating amid both enemy action and labyrinthine minefields. Reflecting on the event today, naval analysts emphasize a lesson learned at a high price. Redundancy in navigation and communication is vital for small unit survivability. The fog, the mines, and the speed of enemy craft had created an environment where even a brief lapse, one incorrect turn, one missed radar echo, could doom a vessel. The disappearance of ML 1303 sits at the intersection of environmental chaos and tactical danger. By the time the fog lifted the next morning, the Channel looked deceptively calm, as if nothing had passed through those waters at all. Search teams fanned out from Portsmouth, sweeping the patrol zone, but found no oil slick, no splintered timber, no drifting life ring. The sea had claimed everything. ML 1303's final mission, like that of PT-67 in the Pacific, left behind a silence too complete to decipher. And in the months ahead, that silence would echo again, this time in the Mediterranean, where yet another Allied patrol craft would vanish under circumstances just as perplexing and just as unresolved. In the late summer of 1943, as the Allied invasion of Sicily pushed northward toward mainland Italy, the Mediterranean Sea became a corridor of covert skirmishes, night ambushes, and high-stakes naval maneuvers. Amid the chaos, one loss stood out for its eerie silence and lack of explanation: the disappearance of Royal Navy MTB-260. Unlike larger destroyers or cruisers, motor torpedo boats were rarely tracked with precision. Yet MTB-260's final patrol on the night of August 12 remains one of the Mediterranean's most perplexing wartime vanishings, a case where the sea absorbed every clue but one, its last cryptic radar report. The struggle for control of the Sicilian coastline had forced British coastal forces into almost nightly engagement. Their mission was to secure the narrow seas between Malta, Sicily, and Tunisia, waters laced with enemy minefields, U-boat patrol lines, and German air reconnaissance. MTB-260, commanded by Sub-Lieutenant Peter Drummond, was a veteran of these tight, dangerous waters. The crew of 14 knew the routes intimately: the shallow reefs, the coves used by Axis supply barges, and the deceptive currents that could pull a torpedo boat off course in minutes. That night, MTB-260 was assigned to escort an ammunition lighter and two small cargo vessels from the Malta base at Marsaxlokk to a rendezvous point south of Cape Passero. These escort missions were routine yet nerve-wracking, requiring the boat to keep formation without revealing its position to enemy aircraft or surface raiders. At 22:17, MTB-260 reported a suspicious radar echo off its starboard side, an unrecognized signal that flickered in and out, consistent with a fast-moving object, but lacking the clarity to confirm whether it was a vessel or an atmospheric disturbance. Minutes later, the signal vanished. By 23:05, MTB-260 had disappeared as well. Insight into the dangers of such missions can be found in a post-war interview with Lieutenant, later Commander, John Gunston, another MTB officer stationed at Malta. The Mediterranean was deceptive, calm one moment, lethal the next. Radar was new, unreliable. We often saw ghosts on the set. The Germans knew our routes, and a single hit from an E-boat or a coastal battery could erase a craft before the men had time to shout. Gunston's words echo the environment in which MTB-260 vanished, one where technology, terrain, and enemy tactics created a perfect fog of uncertainty. Initial speculation centered on German Schnellboot operating from Augusta and Syracuse. These fast attack boats had torpedoed several Allied craft throughout the summer. Yet after the war, surviving Kriegsmarine logs from the 3rd S-boat flotilla showed no claim resembling an engagement with an MTB on that date. German radar stations along the Sicilian coast also reported no trace of a surface contact matching MTB-260's profile. Another possibility was friendly fire. Royal Navy destroyers patrolling north of Malta had strict identification protocols, but in the confusion of night operations, misidentifications happened. A classified Admiralty memo from September 1943 referenced possible fratricide incidents involving MTBs, noting that high-speed silhouettes could appear hostile on radar. Still, no British destroyer reported firing on an unidentified craft that night. The idea of a mine strike remained the most plausible explanation. Axis forces had heavily mined the approaches to Sicily to slow Allied naval operations. Minesweepers had cleared major lanes, but drifting moored mines occasionally broke free and wandered unpredictably. A contact mine detonating under an MTB, constructed of light wood and thin steel plate, would obliterate it instantly. The absence of debris found during the subsequent search seemed to support this theory. Yet one detail prevented investigators from accepting the mine hypothesis outright: the radar echo. Whatever MTB-260 detected shortly before vanishing was recorded clearly enough for the operator to log it, a rare occurrence given the primitive state of 1940s radar. Some historians believe the echo may have represented a German R-boat, smaller and less documented than E-boats, used for coastal patrols and convoy escort. But no surviving record places such a vessel near Cape Passero that night. Modern maritime researchers often cite the case of MTB-260 when discussing the gap between operational certainty and recorded history. Technologies like radar and radio, still in their adolescence during World War II, could deceive as easily as they informed. A fleeting echo, a misread bearing, or a distortion caused by the sea surface could push a command decision in the wrong direction. For MTB-260, this might have meant turning toward danger instead of away from it. Reflecting on the disappearance today, naval analysts identify a key lesson. Even in highly coordinated operations, small craft require redundancy and contingency beyond what wartime logistics often allowed. MTB crews depended heavily on sight, intuition, and radios that could fail without warning. In a battle space as fluid as the Mediterranean, the boundary between safety and disaster could be crossed in seconds. The official search continued for 3 days. Malta dispatched aircraft and several gunboats, sweeping the likely routes. They found nothing, no oil slick, no floating timber, no bodies. The sea remained unwaveringly silent. MTB-260's loss was entered into Admiralty records as cause unknown, a phrase used sparingly but with growing frequency as the war progressed. It became yet another entry in the expanding list of Allied patrol boats erased under mysterious circumstances. And while the Mediterranean quieted after Sicily fell, the pattern of disappearances did not. Soon it would extend far north into the frigid waters off Greenland, where the U.S. Coast Guard faced a loss just as sudden, just as inexplicable, and just as haunting. In the autumn of 1944, as the Battle of the Atlantic reached its final and most desperate phase, a little-known disappearance in the icy waters south of Greenland left U.S. Coast Guard commanders searching for answers that never came. The loss of patrol cutter CG-8-1316, an 83-foot wooden craft assigned to convoy escort duty, stands as one of the Arctic theater's most enduring mysteries. These cutters were designed for rescue and anti-submarine patrols, not for the brutal storms and shifting ice flows of the far North Atlantic. Yet on the night of October 14th, after sending a routine weather transmission, CG-8-1316 simply vanished, leaving no distress call, no wreckage, and no explanation. The struggle of the North Atlantic was never defined solely by enemy contact. Weather, violent, unpredictable, often catastrophic, remained the greatest adversary. The men aboard CG-8-1316 were part of the Greenland Patrol, a division of the U.S. Coast Guard tasked with protecting convoys, tracking U-boats, and rescuing downed air crews navigating the Arctic ferry route from North America to Europe. Their vessels, lightly armed with depth charges and a single 20mm cannon, operated in seas where rogue waves could rise higher than a 3-story building, and icebergs lurked beneath the surface like submerged mountains. On October 14th, the cutter was assigned to escort elements of convoy LN7, a small but vital movement of supply ships bound for Iceland. The seas were rough but manageable. At 21:12 hours, CG-8-1316 reported wind speed, visibility, and barometric pressure to the convoy commander aboard the escort trawler Unimak. The message was calm, precise, nothing unusual, nothing hinting at danger. Minutes later, a dense fog front rolled across the convoy's southern flank. When Unimak attempted to raise the cutter again, there was no reply. Insight into the hazardous nature of the Greenland Patrol comes from Ensign Robert Lowell, a Coast Guard officer who described the environment in his logbook. "The cold is alive out here. Metal groans, wood cracks, and the sea is black as coal. When the fog closes in, we could be 20 yards from a berg and never see it until the hull buckles." His account reflects the constant tension of Arctic navigation. Wooden-hulled craft like CG-8-1316 were especially vulnerable. Even a glancing collision with submerged ice could tear open the bow and flood compartments within minutes. Yet the conditions that night were not unprecedented, nor were they severe enough to cause such an immediate disappearance. That discrepancy troubled investigators from the moment the cutter missed its first scheduled check-in. U-boat activity was another consideration. Although German submarine strength in the Atlantic had dwindled by late 1944, several Type 9 boats still operated near Greenland. However, decrypted Kriegsmarine logs from that period listed no torpedo launches, and none claimed an engagement anywhere near convoy LN7's route. One detail did raise eyebrows among post-war analysts: a vague sonar anomaly reported by the escort vessel Hawes roughly an hour after CG-81316's final transmission. The crew detected a brief, unclear echo, possibly a large submerged object, then lost contact. The officer on duty logged it as likely ice or indistinct mass. No further investigation was ordered due to poor visibility and the escort's obligation to remain with the convoy. Could this have been the cutter sinking rapidly beneath the surface? Or was it merely drifting ice? The record leaves both possibilities open. Mechanical failure was also considered. The 83-foot cutters used gasoline-powered engines that were notoriously temperamental in extreme cold. Carburetor icing could stall both engines simultaneously. If this happened in rough seas or amid drifting ice, the vessel could be pushed broadside into a berg or swallowed by a deep trough. Still, such an event would likely have given the crew time to radio for assistance. That no such signal was sent remains the most confounding aspect of the loss. Modern maritime analysts emphasize a key lesson drawn from cases like CG-8-1316. In navigation zones plagued by extreme weather, redundancy in both communication and positioning is essential. During World War II, however, the Coast Guard operated with minimal technology, no GPS, unreliable early radar, and radios prone to atmospheric distortion. A single equipment failure could render a cutter practically invisible, even to ships only a few miles away. The search for CG-8-1316 lasted 3 days. Aircraft from the Greenland Base Air Detachment swept the convoy lanes in widening arcs. Icebreakers probed the fog-shrouded waters where the cutter's final transmission originated. All they found was drifting slush, fragments of sea ice, and the unbroken surface of the North Atlantic. No oil slick, no debris, no body. The official report concluded that the cutter was lost due to unknown circumstances, possibly collision or structural failure. But unofficial conversations among Coast Guard veterans hinted at something deeper, a sense that the Arctic had taken the vessel in a moment too fast to comprehend and too final to record. In the growing catalog of Allied patrol boats that vanished during World War II, CG-81316's disappearance marked one more entry defined not by what was found, but by what was never recovered. And as 1945 approached, the pattern would continue, shifting back to the Pacific, where the war's closing months produced yet another disappearance, this time in the humid, treacherous waters of New Guinea. By early 1945, the Pacific War was entering its final, violent phase, yet even as Allied forces advanced across the islands of the Southwest Pacific, the region's waters remained some of the most hazardous on Earth. It was here, off the jagged northern coast of New Guinea, that another Allied patrol craft vanished without leaving a single definitive clue. PT-120, part of Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 6, was a battle-tested American patrol boat that had supported countless night raids, shore bombardments, and interception missions along the New Guinea coastline. On the night of February 7, 1945, the boat was ordered to conduct a sweep near the Japanese-held WWII Peninsula. The mission was straightforward. The disappearance that followed was anything but. The struggle facing PT-120's crew began long before the engines even turned over that night. New Guinea's waters were notorious for hidden reefs, unpredictable currents, and sudden squalls that could swallow a small vessel in minutes. The coastline was a maze of mangrove swamps, limestone cliffs, and reef-studded channels that allowed Japanese forces to conceal supply barges, coastal guns, and observation posts with alarming ease. PT-120's men knew these dangers intimately. Their predecessors had fought through them during the long New Guinea campaign, and Squadron 6 had taken significant casualties navigating the same shores where the boat would vanish. PT-120 departed its base at 8 a.m. just before dusk, accompanied by 2 other PT boats, PT-114 and PT-132. The plan was to intercept any Japanese barge traffic attempting to move supplies toward WWII. At 2041, PT-120 reported seeing flashes near the shoreline, possibly muzzle fire from concealed enemy batteries. A few minutes later, PT-114 logged hearing multiple distant detonations in the direction of PT-120. When the formation regrouped shortly after, the boat was gone. Insight into the hazards of the region comes from a combat diary kept by Lieutenant Alan Burrows, another PT boat officer who patrolled the same coastline. The reefs here are alive. They shift, they hide. A channel that's safe at dusk can be a death trap by midnight. You hit one at speed and the sea takes the boat faster than a man can shout. This was no exaggeration. Many PT boats in New Guinea suffered damage from uncharted coral heads that could slice open their hulls like razors. A direct grounding at full throttle might explain a sudden disappearance, but even then, some debris would typically be found. Enemy action remained a primary possibility. Japanese artillery positions around WWII were known to fire at Allied patrols during moonlit nights. A well-placed 75mm shell could obliterate a wooden-hulled PT boat instantly. Yet post-war Japanese records are frustratingly ambiguous. While some battery logs mention firing at unidentified craft on several February nights, none specifically record a confirmed hit. Moreover, the flashes witnessed by PT-120 before vanishing might have been outgoing fire, or something else entirely, such as signal flares or reflections from lightning behind the coastal ridge. Australian and American intelligence teams attempted to piece the story together in the days that followed. Reconnaissance aircraft flying over the likely patrol area reported seeing a small oil patch near a reef, but rough weather prevented close investigation. Search parties dispatched from 8 combed the coast, looking for bodies, wreckage, even a floating ammunition box. They found nothing. The jungle and reefs concealed their secrets too well. One detail that adds complexity is the testimony of a U.S. Navy pilot returning from a mission near WWII that same night. He reported observing an orange flash on the water followed by darkness, but could not identify the source due to distance and cloud cover. The flash could have been a shell impact, a premature torpedo detonation, or even fuel igniting after a structural breach. No definitive match was ever made. Modern analysts reviewing the disappearance highlight the intersection of risk factors that define PT warfare in the Pacific: fragile wooden hulls, volatile fuel stores, aggressive enemy defenses, and dangerous geography. A single mistake, misjudging a channel, misreading a shoreline silhouette, or turning a few degrees off course, could place a boat directly in harm's way. PT-120, like many of its counterparts, operated on the margin of endurance and luck. Yet the complete absence of evidence remains striking. Unlike some losses where survivors later washed ashore or wreckage was recovered by local villagers, PT-120 left nothing. No life jackets. No driftwood. No scattered ammunition. The waters near WWII are deep and unpredictable, and over time shifting sands and coral growth may have consumed any remnants of the boat. Even modern sonar surveys have failed to locate anything conclusively tied to the vessel. To historians, the disappearance underscores a lesson repeated throughout the Pacific War. Even with superior numbers and growing momentum, the Allies faced an environment where nature and enemy persistence combined to create sudden, unexplained losses. PT-120's fate illustrates how the closing months of the war were still marked by uncertainty, danger, and moments of abrupt tragedy. As 1945 progressed, Allied control tightened, and the Pacific Campaign drew closer to its end. But the vanishing of PT-120 remained an open wound in Squadron SX's records, a reminder that even near victory, the war could swallow a boat whole without offering any explanation. And the pattern of disappearances was not yet complete. Before the guns fell silent, the Allies would witness one final mystery, one that tied together the threads of risk, error, and wartime chaos into a sobering conclusion. As the Second World War drew to a close in mid-1945, Allied naval forces across the globe were taking stock of their losses, cataloging the names of ships, boats, aircraft, and crews that had vanished in the chaos of combat. Among these were a series of small, swift patrol craft, PT boats, motor launches, motor torpedo boats, and Coast Guard cutters that had disappeared across multiple theaters with little or no evidence left behind. By war's end, 5 cases in particular stood out: PT-67 in the Solomons, ML-1303 in the English Channel, MTB-260 in the Mediterranean, CG-81316 in the North Atlantic, and PT-120 off New Guinea. Each vanished under different circumstances, yet the pattern they formed raised troubling questions about how the war's smallest vessels could simply slip beneath history's surface. The struggle to understand these cases grew from a universal challenge faced by wartime navies: incomplete records. Events at sea often unfolded too quickly for radio operators to report, too quietly for nearby ships to notice, or too far from land for witnesses to observe. Allied commanders in 1945 reviewing these disappearances found themselves relying on fragments, partial logs, ambiguous radar echoes, scattered sonic anomalies, conflicting testimonies, and occasional enemy reports. When these were assembled, they painted a picture of a war fought not only against enemy forces but also against nature, equipment limitations, and the limits of situational awareness. Insight into how the Allies interpreted such losses comes from a debriefing conducted at the end of the war by Commander Russell Harding of the Royal Navy's Coastal Forces staff. Harding wrote, "A small craft at night is one gust of wind, one unseen reef, one misread bearing away from disaster. In the press of wartime operations, we seldom stop to examine each loss forensically. The sea buries its evidence swiftly." Harding's words were not poetic exaggeration. They reflected a truth borne out in every theater. Small patrol boats, despite their speed and maneuverability, operated on the margins of durability and communication. Their lightweight construction, mostly wood, often hastily repaired, meant that a single catastrophic event could obliterate both vessel and crew before anyone on the radio could react. The absence of survivors in these cases amplified their mystery. In other wartime losses, damaged boats sometimes drifted ashore, or sailors were recovered days later by friendly or enemy forces. But in the 5 incidents examined here, no man returned to tell the story. This lack of testimony removed the single most important factor in reconstructing naval incidents: human memory. Without it, investigators were left to theorize based on circumstantial evidence alone. Still, even without firm answers, patterns emerged. Modern naval historians reviewing these cases highlight 3 primary factors that likely contributed to the disappearances: geography, enemy activity, and wartime communication limitations. In the Pacific, uncharted reefs and narrow channels created instant hazards. In the Channel and Mediterranean, mines and E-boat ambushes lurked in every darkened inlet. In the Arctic, ice, fog, and mechanical failure conspired to erase a cutter without warning. Each environment imposed its own signature dangers, and each disappearance occurred at the intersection of these threats. The reveal that shaped post-war analysis was not a new discovery but rather an unsettling realization: there may never have been a single cause. Modern reviews emphasize that wartime conditions often created situations where multiple dangers overlapped. A PT boat operating near WWII might evade enemy guns, only to strike a reef unseen in the darkness. A motor launch might steer clear of an E-boat ambush but drift unknowingly into a minefield concealed by fog. A Coast Guard cutter might survive hours of violent seas yet fail when a single engine component froze at the wrong moment. These overlapping threats, rather than any singular mystery, are what likely doomed these vessels. Even so, historians caution against accepting any one interpretation too easily. The complete lack of physical evidence in all 5 cases prevents definitive conclusions. This absence challenges researchers to examine how wartime chaos distorts historical memory. In recent decades, underwater archaeology and sonar mapping have allowed exploration of old battle sites, but the oceans in these regions are vast, often thousands of meters deep, and shaped by decades of shifting sands and moving currents. A wreck discovered today might not resemble its wartime configuration, making identification difficult or impossible. Reflecting on the pattern of disappearances, modern naval analysts emphasize a lesson that resonates beyond the war. Uncertainty is often the defining feature of maritime operations. The sea remains hostile, unpredictable, and indifferent. Even the most disciplined crews, the most advanced technology, and the most carefully planned missions remain vulnerable to the ocean's volatility. The war exposed this volatility on a global scale. As the narrative closes, it is important to resist the temptation to romanticize these losses. Though mysterious, they were not supernatural. They were the product of human endeavor in an environment that punished error and luck in equal measure. The men aboard PT-67, ML-1303, MTB-260, CG-8-1316, and PT-120 fought bravely in conditions that offered little margin for survival when things went wrong. Their disappearances form part of the war's vast tapestry, threads lost, not because they were unimportant, but because the sea is a cruel archivist. And so, as historians look back on these vanishings, they are reminded of a final truth: not every story from the Second World War has an ending. Some remain open water, unanswered, unresolved, and still quietly echoing across the decades.